So we'll start down here and talk about the breeding nursery a little bit. And so this is kind of the middle of the whole process in the variety development program. So every variety that you're growing on your farm started off as one plant, a single genotype from a breeder's nursery. Whether it was Pioneer in Indiana, or Blacksburg, Virginia, or Mason, Michigan, that variety started as one plant. So that one plant that shows potential, we take and we grow it out in these hedgerow. This is referred to as a hedgerow nursery because this was a single head from one plant planted out into a row. And so you can see there's some family structure here, and but they're very different. You know, just like your children. You know, they look similar. You can always tell, you know, families that look alike, but there are differences. So that's what we're looking for, is the differences among these varieties for specific traits. What we're looking for is something that has a very short plant stature. Earlier this morning you heard about the dramatic, almost dramatic effects of planting date, moisture availability, and fertilizer applications. So there's a dramatic effect of those treatments on specific varieties. Now, there's just as much variation as there is for those treatments. There is that much variation among the varieties. So, and that's just one variety. You know, so my point is, all these varieties will respond differently to different practices, and so we're trying to predict the best ones out here. So these same lines that we see, these are all potential wheat varieties. There's 2,400 different potential varieties out here, and you can see the differences in on versus onless, differences in plant height, in stature. A good plant height is a short plant height. I know a lot of wheat growers, they're interested in straw, you know, and so if there's adequate moisture and there's a great deal of nitrogen applied, you will get good height expression. But that plant has to be able to support all of that. If a plant that's converting all of that plant food, all of that available nutrition into height and then into yield, if that plant has too much height under it, then gravity will take effect, and you'll see some lodging. So that's one trait that we're looking at when we're trying to improve varieties, and you can see that evolution among varieties that were planted in the 60s and 70s compared to more contemporary varieties. You know, namely Jupiter has very short plant height. Pioneer 25R40 is a very short plant. So that's important in the variety selection process, because we provide a great deal of data on potential varieties from our breeding program and different genotypes that are tested in Michigan. And so the decision on which variety to plant rests ultimately on the grower. And we do our best to provide you with all the information that you would need to make those selections in your specific county. That's a specific geography, specific soil type, specific moisture, and no one knows your farms better than you do. And so and you are the best people to make those decisions on which varieties are best for your farm. So so that's part of the selection process. We're gonna move down the path here a little bit. So if you guys see anything you like, Andrew Wursma is a PhD student in the program here, and he has data on the pedigree and flowering date on all these lines out here. So if you see anything that you like, don't hesitate to ask. So you'll also notice a great deal of variation in winter kill out here. We had a great year for winter hardiness selection. And that doesn't happen but once, maybe in a decade. So anything that's being advanced in the breeding program will have exceptional winter hardiness after this year.
All white wheat, or is it red in your?
Both red and white, yeah. Out in this nursery, there's about 60% white wheat and 40% red wheat. Come on out, guys.
What do you harvest all this and keep it straight?
Oh yeah, we got a we've had some great support for the startup for this program. We've got a single row harvester. It's about the size of a rototiller, but when we select all these lines based on all the characteristics we want, we're gonna take that seed and go to a yield trial with it. So we've got a binder. It's just like the old pole type corn harvesters, where it'll bind all this up, tie it in a knot, and kick it off to the side. So we automated it. The old-fashioned way is really hard on the back. So that hasn't changed for 10,000 years that way. So right over here we've got kind of an older variety, just to show some of the evolution in the program. This is a sibline. Has anyone ever grown D8006? This is red amber, which is a sibline of that. Same pedigree, same parentage. It's a little bit later. It's somewhat taller than I would like, but you can see the difference between that variety and this more contemporary variety, red ruby. How many of you are growing red ruby this year? Okay, so it's fairly popular variety. There's about 500,000 acres out there. So if any of you are growing it, it's got to be significant. Anyway, I'd like to point out that you can see these berries are very much further developed on this variety here. So there's a couple of factors there: faster grain fill and flowering date. So red ruby flowers much earlier, 4 to 5 days earlier than an older variety like red amber. And so all you hear about countries like the United Kingdom, Germany, and even places like out in the Pacific Northwest, like Oregon, getting 150 bushel yields. Part of that is the extended grain fill period. We have very cool temperatures here, adequate moisture, and so when you get a variety that's flowering a few days earlier, it has a head start on the grain fill period. So there was a correlation, a negative correlation between flowering date and grain fill period just in the trial data from last year, where earlier flowering lines tended to yield. It wasn't certain every time, but they tended to yield higher. Early varieties tended to yield higher. So part of the selection that we apply to our breeding nurseries is for earliness. So if you can plant soybeans, then your wheat should be heading at that time. You know, that's kind of a safe estimate on maturity selection. But as you can see, there are differences in maturities. So that's kind of another consideration to look at when you sit down to think about what varieties you're going to plant for next year. That's something to take into consideration, and the amount of acreage that you have. Farmers are great at managing risk and spreading risk, and so part of a way to do that is to spread the maturities of your variety. So you could have a variety that flowers early, that reaches maturity and an adequate percent moisture earlier than a variety that's planted on another few hundred acres. So that's one way to spread your risk, is with different maturities of your varieties. So not all varieties are created equal, and well, just as not all varieties are identical for different traits, and so not all farms are identical. So I want to say that it's you know, the decision is up to the growers too, and you know, I know change is always hard, and but sometimes change is good. There's some varieties like Hopewell, an old red wheat, AC Mountain, an older white wheat, that still have exceptional yield potential. They're consistent across years. But there are some new racehorse type varieties that if we want to move our state average up to 80, 90 bushels, you know, it's okay to so it's less of a risk to take one variety, a few bags of seed, just try it out. Most of you probably have yield monitors on your combines. You can get accurate data on you know, and knowing which section of your fields you're planting your new test variety. So it's it would be a good practice to try some new varieties on a certain portion of your farm to see how well they perform, because not all varieties perform the same in all environments, and you want what's best for your farm then. So we can move down the way here a little bit. These are some more contemporary varieties released from MSU here. We have Jupiter, which is planted behind us here actually. It's a little bit later, very short plant stature, medium. I would say a medium maturity variety. It's not very early. Ambassador, very similar line, but much earlier in maturity. Very high yield potential for both of these varieties. I wanted to point out that these two varieties had the greatest varietal response to the high management practices that we used last year. So just across the road over there, we had our first high management trial where we came out with an early season fungicide application, well, how much was it? 50 pounds of 28% with streamer bars. We came through with streamer bars in mid-season application. And then of course we came through with Prosaro to finish it off. But with those applications, granted this is just 1 year data, but this gets at the potential. Talking about yield potential, Jupiter and Ambassador were in the top 5 responders. So these two had an over 20 bushel response to the additional applications, the additional management practices. So you will see some, you know, we run these things through the gauntlet, and this is part of the process because you will see scab out here. None of this out here is actually treated. So, and I wanted to point out that we do screen all of our varieties. We're funded by the U.S. Wheat and Barley Scab Initiative that's been continuously funded, and we screen every variety that you'll see in the state performance trials next year. We're collecting data on incidence and severity for scab. We'll evaluate the number of fusarium damaged kernels and VOM levels in that. So so that's just part of the data that we're trying to provide you to make the best decisions and for the best to make the best variety planting decisions for your farm. So scab is a big one. So moving down here, we're getting into some of the new MSU variety releases. So this right here is F1026R. It's half Pioneer 2537. And you know, this kind of typifies a wheat that could respond well to high management. You know, it's got a short plant stature, and you can tell by the size of these berries. We're already at we're moving into milk. We're actually at soft dough stage with this one. So you know, which gets back to my point about earliness and getting that grain filled as quickly as possible before we start reaching those high temperature spikes in July. We want to fill as much grain while these nighttime temperatures are cool. I mean, if you've got the window, you know, if you're having the windows open in the house at night, that means that equates to good grain fill weather. That's good grain fill weather then. So F1026R and another line, F13R, these are being tested across the whole eastern U.S., all the way from Virginia to North Carolina into Oklahoma as far west as Wichita, Kansas, and then up into Ontario. So these are part of the Uniform Eastern Red Wheat Nursery. So these are getting tested in many different environments under many different conditions. So those are a couple of outstanding red wheats that we have in the pipeline. So these down here, F1048, this is a white wheat. It's got some Aubrey in the pedigree. But again, you can see the berries are filling out very well compared to compared to red amber down there that was just getting started. You know, it's a little bit late in the game. So yeah, this is exceptional. I am very excited about this. I wouldn't want it to get any taller than it is right now. And of course, you're going to have to apply Prosaro, Caramba. You know, you gotta apply that. Which I know you do. I know I'm preaching to the choir about that kind of stuff. So that's an exceptional white wheat. You know, and I saw this in some of the trial results on winter kill. That's a trait that you get maybe once a decade that you get selection for, and we got it this year. Boy, all the I apologize for the weeds, but that's the result of the winter kill there, you know, and the spottiness. Now, one line that I saved the best one for last. You know, this is one line that I'm fairly excited about, but you can't get too excited. We've been testing this line for 3 years now, and it has exceptional levels of scab resistance. Very, very, very low VOM levels. Very low infection index in the field. Its FHB index is very, very low. That means when scab lands on this plant, there's only going to be infection on that one spikelet. Out of 16 to 20 spikelets on there, it's only going to be that one. It just stops scab right in its tracks. And this is the result of decades of breeding and selection. The first cross was made with a Chinese wheat from boy, I forget the region. W14 is the name. Wuhan 14. This was not adapted to Michigan, not a Michigan white wheat, but after years of selection, this line now is 75% ambassador. So you can think of this line as ambassador with exceptional scab resistance. It's got a major gene, so there was a lot of technology that was implemented in the development of this variety. In the breeding process, there was DNA taken from the tissue, and we used a process called marker-assisted selection. So there's a gene on chromosome 3B in this wheat variety that confers exceptionally high levels of scab resistance, and it's detectable with a DNA marker, and that the results of that DNA marker test correspond to the very high levels of scab resistance that we see in the field. So that's kind of like this is the traditional plant breeding that we do, where we make the crosses, and there's years and years of selection, so it can take between 10 and 14 years by that route. Now, one other method that we're using, and this is a project we're funded from the Michigan Wheat Checkoff, is to use double haploid technologies. Now, this is something that people have been using in maize breeding for years now, and that's part of the acceleration in the breeding process and variety development in maize. And we actually have a service in Kansas, Manhattan, Kansas, where we can send them F1 seeds, and a year later, they'll send us back true breeding lines, fixed lines, that we can actually take out into the field and do replicated trials with. And that cuts 5 to 6 years off the entire breeding process. So instead of taking 12 to 14 years, we're looking at 6 to 8 years before from where it goes from crossing in the greenhouse at Michigan State to seed increase and being grown on your fields. So that's one technology we're using. Another technology is genomic selection, and are any of you also beef producers or dairy farmers? Okay, so they're using that same technology in herd improvement, where they can take a tissue sample and look at the DNA of that sample and determine what specific traits it will have. In dairy, you know, high feed efficiency or butter fat or milk yield, we can actually predict what kind of levels of scab resistance or yield potential that this line will have based on DNA marker evidence. So we do traditional breeding, and also what you would kind of call the next generation plant breeding, where we're DNA marker technologies. And so these are the same technologies that are being used, you know, in the private sector, large companies, and we can do these same things very well in our public breeding program. So, do you guys have any questions on that? Anything about the variety development process?
How long is this one?
This one, we have strips at Mason. So F1014 had such good performance that I planted strip plots, seed increases. So we'll actually have enough if this line continues to perform well. We might be 2 to 3 years, I would say, to where we're you know, we're about 2 to 3 years from the point where that seed will be sold. Yeah, yep. So we can release it, and then there's another year for seed increase, certified seed.
Are you spraying it at all for
No.
fungicide? No.
It's standing on its own.
Wow.
you know. So, and that's what makes it stand out, is that it's able to resist scab, just based on its genetics.
How about, do you have it next to like Ambassador? Is it yielding the same or a little better?
It is actually, and so yeah, that's why I emphasize this line today, is because it's kind of the culmination of all that work to combine exceptionally high yield with the high levels of scab resistance, which has been a challenge. You can select for scab resistance in a breeding program, and you'll get scab resistance. You'll also get yield resistance. So it's a double-edged sword, you know. In plant breeding, you always get what you select for, you know. But this is the rare case where you get high-end yield and good disease resistance. So we'll also be evaluating it for sprouting resistance as well this year. So we're going to get a visual sprout score, and we're going to get an amylase assay. We've got an assay where we can predict falling number, basically, for these lines earlier in the breeding process. So that's all. We run these things through the gamut. So.
Did all these start off the same size strips?
Yeah, yeah.
All winter kill, where we see the hole.
Exactly. Yep, exactly. So there was a little bit of winter kill just because we've had such mild winters in the last 5 to 10 years. And then whereas a line like this right here, this has exceptional winter hardiness. You can see there, part of this is filled in just with tillering this spring, but the rest of these are demonstrating adequate winter hardiness. And you can see the holes over here, and that's winter doing its worst, So.
Why in the same variety? We see some with a beard and some there's nothing. What's going on?
That seed came out of the combine. that was one spike that got caught in the reel, and that's you just hit on one important part in the breeding process, and that's seed purification right there, and that's why we harvest these lines right here as a single row, so that we can actually keep all this line. I mean, they look very similar, so we want to keep that seed clean.
They all look like they're coming out of the same, the same tiller, the same.
Yeah. And so it will compensate. The same as in the Jupiter around us. You can see there's spots where it was winter killed, but one plant with all that extra light, that'll induce tillering right there. We will tiller, and we've had actually great tillering conditions. Those cool nighttime temperatures I was talking about.
So these are actually 3 different varieties.
3 different, yeah, exactly. Now this is a special case here where they're all from this is where I was doing a cleanup. Actually, it relates to that point where there was some heterogeneity in the plot last year that these came from. So we harvested single plants out of there, so that's where I said every variety comes from one single plant at one point in time, and so there's slight variation among these. Now, if further out here, some of these other varieties. Now these were all single plants that came from the same plot, but they're very different. You can see slight variation in plant height, winter hardiness, and so that's part of why here's an exceptional outlet contrast here. You see this very tall on variety here, and this is let me see. Yeah, these would have came from the same plot, but here's an onless, on versus onless, and so we're separating them out and purifying them, and so they're comparison. They're pretty much sister lines, but there's some variation within that plot, and so in this way we're looking at them as true breeding lines, as pure lines then. And so that pure line seed, then we can actually go to a yield trial with those next year. So that's their destination for next year. And hopefully onto your farms in a few years after that.